Hello, I'm George White, and this is What's Left.
When I said, hey, hey, what's wrong with you? I want to turn you round upside down just to see you smile. You know I'm gonna be there one till bit more.
So I'd just like to bring on my co-host this evening, Sean Halsall.
Hi, George. How you doing?
Hi, Sean. You all right?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not so bad, not so bad. So we've got back Francisco Dominguez.
Hello, Francisco.
Hello again.
How are you, comrade?
I'm all right.
Fantastic. So, absolutely. So we'll get straight back into it. So yeah, last time John, we spoke about the decline of the United States and the sort of rise of China. And I think this time it would be remiss of us. We spoke a little bit about what was going on in Venezuela and Cuba, but to go a bit more in depth there with Trump's Monroe Doctrine or whatever he's calling it now. And I think that's important to give context to some of the other stuff going on because, yeah, Latin America and Latin American solidarity is something that's very close to all of our hearts here.
Yeah, so let me start with some background, which I try to make short, because otherwise, since they're not understood. After the coup d'etat in Chile in 1973, there was a wave of neoliberal policies throughout the continent. Many of them were dictatorship or very authoritarian, totally supported by the United States. The United States, I mean, the first neoliberal country in the world was Chile. Later on, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, adopted in 1980. But Chile was the laboratory. We were the guinea pigs. And this wave of neoliberalism brutalized Latin America so much. And then all this took place, even reached the time when the Soviet Union collapsed, 1991. So in those 20-something, nearly 30 years, the level of poverty was horrific. The amount of suffering of the masses were incredible. By, say, 1998, the level of poverty in Latin America as a whole was about 48%, which is, is horrific. And then this was regionally distributed unevenly because more developed countries such as Argentina, you get 30, but places such as Honduras, you get 77, 80%, and so on. So Mexico was 45%, just to give you some sense of, if you are poor in the context of Latin America, context of neoliberalism, in Latin America, poor countries, you have nothing to fall back on. You just literally die. So either you become a delinquent, which is one way of redistributing income, as economists used to say, or constantly say, or you organize resistance. And, the population of Latin America began to organize resistance all throughout that period. Social movements emerged everywhere and so on. But just to give you an idea of the brutality of the empire, not to allow their system to be challenged. In Chile, the Pinochet dictatorship assassinated 5,000 people in 17 years. Next door in Argentina, in 6 years, 32,000 were assassinated. In Nicaragua, had the audacity to have a revolution against Somoza, US supported Somoza. The United States waged a proxy war against them with the Contras. 50,000 people were assassinated in 1 decade. In Peru, because of the rebellion of the indigenous masses through the Chinese Pass, which was problematical, but it was a rebellion of the indigenous population, 60,000 people were assassinated. In El Salvador, in Central America, was a guerrilla struggle, and they controlled 30% of the territory. 80,000 were assassinated in one decade. And next door in Guatemala, 120,000. I can go on with the rest of it, but that gives you an idea of how horrible it was. But nevertheless, this system was not able to sustain itself because it was getting into crisis more and more and more and more. And it began to, crumble away by about 1994, 1995. So there was an enormous transformation in 1998 when Hugo Chavez was elected in Venezuela, which is a complete surprise. Nobody, well, including me, nobody understood very well what that meant. Nevertheless, this inaugurated, the possibility, that is to say, Chavez demonstrated that the left could win on an anti-neoliberal program, and that encouraged everybody else to do the same. And the system was crumbling away anyway. So there was a wave of left-wing progressive revolutionary governments throughout Latin America. From, I would say, Lula was elected in 2002, and then it was Ecuador, it was, Chile, it was Bolivia, and so on. Not every country was engulfed in this, but it dominated the whole thing quite dramatically, these new policies. And the center of everything was regional integration, to work together, to defend themselves together, to integrate as much as possible what they have in order to be able to confront the empire. And it worked so well. I mean, I don't have too much time to go into all the details. Nevertheless, one figure is key. The level of poverty in 1998 was 48%. By 2016, which is the inflection point when Dilma Rousseff, the first female president of Brazil, was impeached, the level of poverty had gone down to 23%. That is to say, in something like a decade, the left, without being very drastic, was able to take about 100 million people out of poverty. Huge number of universities were created. They nationalized just about everything they could. Gas in Bolivia, oil in Venezuela, and so on. I mean, and the number of them who expelled the US ambassador and broke relations with the United States were incredible. Many numbers of them. Rafael Correa, president of Ecuador, of the Citizens Revolution, he did not renew the license to the Manta US military base in Ecuador. And then, they put all sort of pressure on him. I'm telling you this anecdote because it tells you how it was at the time. Also the pressure, they threatened with military invasion. And he said, "You don't budge, not once." He said, "I'm not going to renew the license, full stop, period." So, because they tried all the threats and everything, all the intimidation did not work, they realized that maybe they have to try something different. So, how much would you be prepared to accept for us to actually, maintain the military base? He said, "Oh," said, "now you're talking." So the Yanks thought, right, finally. They said, "Look, if it's not a problem for you to have a military base in my country, I want Ecuador to have a military base in the United States. And I would like to have it in Florida." And, that was the end of the conversation. So that gives you an idea how far things go. The transformation was not just economic, it was cultural. The indigenous population had a government in Bolivia. They're the majority there. Black people actually suddenly became protagonists of everything. Women massively incorporated themselves into the politics. I mean, it was a new world. I was so delighted, I remember, And then these did not last. The reason was because capitalism in 2008 messed it up again with the credit crunch. And because Latin America was so dependent on the export of raw materials, and those who were buying stopped buying, the consequence was they could not maintain the social programs in many places. The result was the United States began to capitalize, intervene everywhere, overthrew the government in Honduras, then they went for everybody else. And then, they managed to actually score substantial points, even to manage to get a fascist elected in Brazil, and they managed to imprison Lula, who was charged with corruption falsely, and even they gave him 12 years in prison. So it was extremely bad. And Venezuela survived, Cuba survived, Nicaragua survived, but just about the rest of them went down the pan as well. So what you have now is that there was an attempt to have a second wave, but then Donald Trump was elected. And Donald Trump came with the concept in 2016, we're being too soft to these people. We need to actually go with a hatchet. And then it began to apply, because the few left, as it were, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba particularly, not exclusively, they apply economic warfare, which was really horrific, both to Cuba, which they've been doing it for 60-something years, and Venezuela, which they began in 2016-17. Between 2017 and 2019, because of the sanctions against the people of Venezuela by the US, 40,000 people died unnecessarily. And if you take the period 17 to 20, then it is estimated more than 100,000 people died unnecessarily. The most vulnerable, children with problems, when they're born, pregnant women, the elderly, people with diabetes and so on, all of them died. Not all of them, but many of them died. So if you compare that with the worst military dictatorship, which was Chile in 73, and they killed only, only 5,000, 100,000 equivalent to throwing bombs on countries. And this is what the United States prepared to do. So this was not done. It failed because President Maduro managed, Venezuela in 2017, 2018 had an rate of inflation of 1.5 million%. Can you imagine what that is? I can't. By 2020, 2021, Venezuela was growing economically, and then the inflation was in single digits, 6%, which, miraculous. Venezuela used to import 70% of the food that it consumed because it had oil, just import the thing. Then as a consequence of the policy of President Maduro, what it did actually Venezuela became self-sufficient on food by 93, 95%. And so on, but it was still under pressure. So then Biden came around. Biden, promised he was going to get rid of the sanctions against Cuba, but never did. What he did was the very last week of his administration, he decided to actually take Cuba out of the state that sponsored terrorism list. And then knowing very well that as soon as Trump came to office, it will reinstate them, which is what they did. So what you have is economic warfare, which is working extremely intensely. In terms of Nicaragua, just as a sort of additional information, the United States prepared a coup attempt as a rebellion, really, an insurrection. It took them about 3 years. They spent, according to information which is available, about $45 million with proxies inside the country and so on. And they went for it, and the rebellion lasted about 6 months. And more than 300, 400 people were killed as a consequence of, this rebellion. It was really horrific. The same rebellion was organized in Venezuela. They tried to organize in Cuba, but Cuba is much more sturdy. In Cuba, they went around burning people alive. So none of this worked. So Trump number 2.0, decided he was going to sort it out, more dramatically. And then what they did, in 2025, in September, they decided to actually go for the deployment of the military fleet, of the war fleet. It had 16 destroyers. It had helicopters, military bases around the place in Puerto Rico, Panama, Trinidad and Tobago, which helps, and so on. And then they began to blow into smithereens little boats around the place to intimidate them, and so to say, we want you to capitulate. And because they did not capitulate, because they spent from September all the way to January, they blew out with missiles about 200 fishermen who were doing nothing else but that, accusing them of being drug traffickers. Falsely, of course. They never demonstrated this. And because the government did not give up and did not capitulate, did not give in, they decided to go for the military attack. And the intention, the way they calculated, this is Marco Rubio who argued this point. He said, in order to sort out Cuba, we have to cut off the supply of oil to Cuba, which comes from Venezuela. So we need to sort out Venezuela in order to sort out Cuba. And so they did. So they went for it, as we know. On January the 3rd, they went for 4 cities, they bombed 4 cities. They killed about 120, 130 people. They went to the presidential residence. They assassinated in cold blood all the presidential guard, including 32 Cuban heroes who were there on international mission. And then they kidnapped the presidents. The president and the first lady, who is the Venezuelans call the first combatant, because she's a leader of the Chavista movement. She's a elected member of the National Assembly. She was the lawyer of Hugo Chavez when he was in prison, when he had carried out an insurrection in 1992, which failed. So she's not just a lady, she's not just a wife, she's just much more than that. She's a leader. It's quite important to make sure that people know this. And the extraordinary thing was that they kidnapped the president, and the Venezuelans had built an army of militias, about 6 million militias. But there was no enemy to fight because there was no invasion, there was no troops on the ground, and the president went away. So what was posed for the Venezuelans was they will go, if they confronted the United States would bomb them out of existence. Bombing from outside, the way they do. The worst part of it was the possibility, or maybe more or less the certainty, I think, that the United States were going to bomb the oil industry completely out of existence, but obliterate it. There is a Bolivarian revolution because they managed to get control of the oil revenues. There would be no Venezuela, let alone Venezuelan revolution, without the oil. So they came to the following conclusion. This is a united decision by the party, the armed forces, all the Chavista state institutions, everybody, that the best thing was to actually engage in diplomacy with the United States, normalize as much as possible the relations with them, and then, this is where we are. The important point is this. The United States obviously exerting a huge amount of coercion over the Venezuelan government, because both Rubio and Trump have made open threats that if they're not, the government of Venezuela, led by Delcy Rodriguez, who was the vice president, was appointed by the Supreme Court on the 3rd of January and the 4th of January, next day. If she doesn't do what they want, they will go for a second strike. And the second strike will mean decapitation, which will mean, a second layer of leader will be eliminated, and they can't do that. And these leaders have to be very public, because, that you cannot hide away. When you're leading a revolution, you have to be up there. And they are, I've seen them all the time on videos, etc. So this is the most peculiar situation that's been created, which is totally unprecedented. On the one hand, the Chavista state apparatus, armed forces, the party, PSUV, everything has remained absolutely intact. The grassroots organization, which is about 50,000 of them, very well organized, extremely militant, is still there. The extreme right wing that was, advocating military intervention by the United States are nowhere to be seen. They're completely discredited. They have no presence in the country. And there is a section of the right wing who are collaborating with the government in a national united front to defend the nation. So this is a sort of, I would say like jiu-jitsu, perhaps is the best. The government of Venezuela is trying to play for time for as long as possible to avoid the premature confrontation, because if there is a premature confrontation, given that Trump is desperate, it could be really catastrophic. So therefore, they are forced to make concessions which are extremely unpalatable. We have seen some of them. They receive guests that they didn't know, one such as the chief of the CIA, then the Southern Command went there, then, parliamentary delegation from the United States. And the government had to, receive them and be courteous and so on, because there is an arrangement. Interestingly, the Trump administration recognized the Delcy government, and the United States never recognized the Chavista government, certainly never recognized the President Maduro. The interesting thing is that President Maduro was not recognized, but Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the interim president, come from that election. So de facto, they have recognized that election as well, which, they don't care because, they have the upper hand right now. So the United States have created a current account somewhere else. Nobody's totally clear whether it's in Qatar or maybe the United States, where the oil that the Venezuelans are selling to the United States, which was not buying, not because Venezuela don't want to sell them, but because the United States stopped buying it. Now they're buying every amount they can, and this money is being deposited in an account that is controlled by the United States, and the government of Venezuela doesn't like it, but is fighting to get it back. As legally, it belongs to Venezuela, internationally in all sorts of sense. Nevertheless, the United States is abusive enough, certainly the Trump administration, to get away with murder. So we have that situation every single time since January the 3rd. There have been demonstration after demonstration after demonstration, which are massive in Venezuela, demanding that President Maduro and Celia Flores, the first combatant, are, safe return to Venezuela, and the trial is a short trial and so on. So we are in a difficult situation in the following sense. The US government is trying to, organize through the media a smear campaign saying Delcy Rodriguez is their asset. The interim president is their asset. They keep saying things and so on, and they keep, using what they call optics. That is to say, they send somebody who is going to produce an almost, revulsion, and then the intention is to actually create a separation, a chasm between the rank and file and the government. This has not happened. These are maintained total unity. They really remain really united. But at the same time, where the has effect is some sections of the global solidarity movement have begun to have doubts. Some of them even have begun to denounce, the current government. It's a minority, but it's a problem. I've did the research, and the problem is mainly in some sections of the left in the United States. I'm not going to name any, because everybody's entitled to opinions, and that's not the point of this discussion. But also some in Europe. So where imperialism is strong, you get this sort of doubt, and then you get this sort of breaking. But it's small, it's a minority.
Just on that, I think a lot of people completely misunderstand how democracy is done in Venezuela, and it becomes very easy to sort of talk of Chavez and Maduro as dictators, in air quotes, which just isn't the case, as we know. But I think that's misunderstood. Could you quickly, just for a couple of minutes, talk about how decision making happens in Venezuela and how it is distributed to almost street level?
Yeah, the Constitution says that the Venezuela system is one of participatory democracy. That is to say, the state has the responsibility of having, run the whole overall business, deciding the budget, having foreign policy and so on. But when it comes to the question of implementing the social program, then it is organized on a grassroots basis. And there are, every time I look at this, I remember the last count that when I did research some time ago, it was 46,000. And then the last one was 50,000. What is interesting is 85% of these communal councils, which are massive organizations, very powerful, are run by women in Venezuela. I've seen these women myself with a cap. I wouldn't like to be on the wrong side of them. They're really running the show. And what they do is that, the money that is coming from above, they decide by discussions as to how it's run, how it's used, if they want the clinic, if they want the school, and they determine what is required in their community. So it works really well. When you go to there, which I've been there many times, I remember, there was a sort of state subsidized supermarket. And I went in there, can I see it? And they said, of course you can. I look at the product. And I remember I grabbed a packet of beans. And then I look at it, it's 1 kilogram, all the specific. I turn it around, and on the back, there were articles of the Constitution telling them what their rights were. And then I went for rice, the same story, coffee, the same story. I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. So, and they have spaces, they have, institutions, bodies, buildings everywhere. The Constitution says that if there is a building which is empty, because nobody's been using it for whatever time, then they can actually take it over, produce a budget for a particular community thing, and then the government will cough up the money, and then, will look at the budget, and then they will establish it. And there are, thousands of these things. I remember I went to visit one in a place called Cariquao, and they had, bakery, they have training of Excel, Word, all the computing stuff. They have barbers, hairstyle for women and men. They have carpentry. And that particular one, which was in the worst moment, I remember, had generated, because I asked them, generated 150 jobs, which were, solid jobs paid by these activities. And then I remember, as we were discussing, there were, visitors from many countries. And as we were talking about this, then from the bakery, bread just out of the oven was coming out, and the smell was delightful. So I remember saying to them, to the guys who were telling us, I said, can I have one? I want to have one, if possible, 2 of those. I said, I'll pay for it if necessary. And then they didn't know what to do. And they look at the woman who was in the corner, who was running the show. I noticed, and they look at it, and she went, so we got the bread. So, this is sort of the inventiveness, the creativity, the community being mobilized in every street, in every neighborhood, everywhere. You have these committees. So that's why the United States, they pretend is colonized Venezuela. It's a farce. Of course, it exerts coercion, and of course the government have to ensure they make coercion to avoid premature confrontation. But it's one of the best experiences in terms of grassroots democracy that I'm aware of. And President Maduro tried to create what we call the communal state. That is to say, the communes were going to run the show. And he was building it, and then, he was kidnapped. So that gives you an idea of where they are. So in terms of the overall, Venezuela is suffering serious consequences and is under pressure now. So our job, and we wrote an article with a guy from the United States, Roger Harris, saying, our job is not to adjudicate for every tactical decision that the Venezuelan government makes, because we have to understand it's made under pressure, under coercion. Our job is to concentrate on the main problem, which is the defense of national sovereignty and the right to self-determination, and focus on U.S. imperialism, which is the aggressor. And of course, the problem this is going to be resolved not by us telling the Venezuelans what to do, but by Venezuelans themselves to know how the best they can defend their country. And therefore it will take the time that it will take. We'll see. So that's as far as Venezuela is concerned. Go on.
And just to say, obviously, bombing non-combatant boats in the Caribbean is a criminal act. It is not illegal. It's not legal to do. To kidnap a president is not something that is legal to do. So what is to seize assets of countries or not make available assets of countries is not legal to do. But what is the maybe the international legal organizations, how are they maintaining the vestiges of sort of neutrality when clearly this is happening and there is no condemnation? And also, how do governments around the world, thinking of the UK government, the UK Parliament, the United States, senators and Congress people, how are they justifying their stance on this, or are things happening that are trying to oppose these things and maintain even the vestiges of international law?
Yeah, the West capitulated to the policy to the stance of the United States, basically. Keir Starmer made a statement on the day when Maduro was kidnapped, the day after. Everybody was demanding we organized 2 pickets outside down the street, where speaker after speaker was demanding he condemned it because it was a gross, unambiguous, violation of international law. The kidnapping of the president, the killing of people, and so on, was a crime against humanity. And he said, something of the further, I'm paraphrasing, that Maduro got the fate that he deserved. He was completely unhappy with what he's done. And pretty much the rest of the Europeans and the allies of the United States have done the same. But if you go further afield, in Africa and so on, there have been plenty of criticism and so on. Now, let me separate the question. First, on the question of the indictment of President Maduro, which is, what exactly is going on there. And then the question of the assets, such as the gold in here. The charges against President Maduro are drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, and wielding weapons. Those are the 3 charges. And there is the indictment, which is available online. I read it all. It's about, 40-something pages. It's not very long. I think they have a very weak case because they say that President Maduro was running an organization within the state of Venezuela that's very vague about their language, that was actually shipping hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States, which is obviously a lie, but it can be demonstrated with actual factual information. The United Nations, the most reliable information about drug trafficking in the world and drug crime in the world, is produced by the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which produces a report of about 300 pages with every imaginable detail. You want to know what is going on in Thailand about this, it will be there. If you know what is going on in Argentina, but it will be there. And if it's cannabis, methadone, whatever it is there in detail, graphs, statistics, and so on. They inform, and they've been saying this year after year after year, because they produce a report every year, which people like me read. Between 87 to 92% of the cocaine produced in Latin America, Colombia mainly, but also Peru and Bolivia, Ecuador as well, reaches the United States through the Pacific. Venezuela has no coast in the Pacific, only in the Caribbean. And they say, the same office of the United Nations say that between 5 to 7% try to make it through Venezuela, using Venezuela as a transit country. The UK is a transit country, the United States is a transit country, so you cannot blame the government of drug trafficking if your country is being used by drug traffickers as a transit. So in that sense, that charge is very weak. There is no evidence really. The evidence points in different directions. Even the DEA has similar figures. The second charge of narco-terrorism is more interesting, but at the same time it's even weaker. They list meetings of Venezuelan officials, including Maduro, with several organizations which are categorized as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs as they call them. The FARC, the ELN, and the Tren de Aragua, and so on. And they say, the date when they met and the places. The last one, they reckon, was between somebody in the Venezuelan government and the FARC in 2021. It so happened that the FARC actually became a normal legal political party in Colombia in 2017. So meeting them in 2021 doesn't matter. That's number one. But number two, these organizations, all of those mentions in the indictment actually were declared officially by the United States foreign terrorist organizations in December 2025. So there were no FTOs when they met officials from the Venezuelan government. So it's very weak. And then the accusation of wielding weapons when they attacked the presidential residence in order to abduct him. He had a machine gun, and apparently he used it. Well, first of all, it was not a crime because he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces in Venezuela, number one. And number two, if that were to be a crime, it took place in Venezuelan jurisdiction. The United States has nothing to do with it. So these are the charges. And therefore, they're very weak. And the situation now is the actual date of the trial is being postponed in agreement with the defense and the prosecution and including President Maduro apparently, that is going to take place in July 2027. It's 1 year of preparation for the whole thing. So the Venezuelans tell us that this is a good thing, even though it's no good. So they're not sure about what to do. I think Trump calculated he's going to have Maduro as a trophy. Like, excuse me, like the Roman emperors, when they captured somebody from Gaul and then brought them to Rome in chains and so on. And actually, it's become a liability because now they don't know what to do with it. This is me without knowing all the details. But clearly reading the indictment, and so you can see it's extremely weak, because they also originally accused him of being the head of the Cartel de los Soles. And then they dropped the charge because the Cartel de los Soles does not exist. So that gives you an idea of where they are. I think he wanted to use it politically, and then it hasn't worked, and we'll see what happens. But it looks interesting. By the way, President Maduro and Celia Flores are being defended by the same lawyers team that defended Julian Assange. So they're in good hands. And Barry Pollack is the one who is, and the information that is coming from them is quite sparse. It's not a lot, and it's understandable. We just read what is informing the news and so on. And I think we know sufficiently to know exactly where things are. So that's number one. But number two, after the earthquake, poor Venezuela, for goodness sake, not only have to suffer 26 years of aggression, not only have to suffer the attack and the abduction of their president, but on top of that, they had a massive earthquake. It was a double earthquake in two directions, 7.2 and 7.5 in magnitude, and that squeezed the epicenter much worse than it had been a number 10, magnitude number 10, magnitude 10. The epicenter is La Guaira. I visited, I know this place, a coastal town in the Caribbean. The total number of people who have died so far is about 5,400. That's the latest figure. And every time it increases by less people than in the increases before. So it's an indication, it's going to be around that. 5,000 is a lot. The level of destruction is 856 buildings actually have suffered damage. And 190 of them collapsed of that total. So though it is big, I come from Chile where we are very accustomed to earthquakes, this is not too bad, although it's bad. So the government, and this is the important point, the media have been saying, corporate media have been saying that the government was completely responsible and did not respond, abandoned people, left them alone, and so, which is a complete lie. On the 24th of June and 25th of June, the government immediately mobilized troops, forces, and so on, rescue teams, and began to receive international support and so on. About 174 countries, expressed support for the government, and they're going to send some support, some medicine, some food, and so on. The government has set up 107 camps, which are schools and residences, not just tents, for people who actually are homeless. The total number of people who are homeless is about 18,000. But there are people who cannot occupy their buildings yet until they're repaired. That's why the number of comes. The government is, distributing food and so on. The number of people who have been injured is in the region of 24,000. The government ensured that all of them went to hospitals to be treated and private clinics. And whenever there is a cost, the government is paying for the cost. The government has already identified 40 areas where buildings can be built, without the problem of earthquake damaging them. In fact, of the total number of buildings that collapsed, only 3% have been the buildings built by the housing mission, by the housing program. Only 3%. The rest is just private. So it indicates, how good they were. And the government has identified 40 sites, and the intent, they already are putting the money and getting resources in order to build 225,000 houses, which is going to resolve the problem of homelessness caused by the earthquake. This is where the problem lies. the total estimate of reconstruction, according to the United Nations sources, several bodies have estimated, it is in the region of $40 billion, around $37-40 billion, which is a lot of money. And it so happens that the amount of resources, assets, financial and others, which have been retained illegally by the United States and the US accomplices, including 31 tons of gold here in the UK, is about 40 billion, just perhaps even more. So the government is insisting we want these resources back as soon as possible because we need to reconstruct. And the UK government, just to consider, because I want this to be our focus, particularly here, the UK government actually did not return the gold to Venezuela when they requested it because there was a government called the interim government of Juan Guaido, which was invented by Trump. Now, the opposition itself, in December 2023, decided to abolish the interim government of Juan Guaido, so that does not exist anymore. So there is no reason, whatever, no legal or any other, certainly not moral, for the UK not to return the government. Yvette Cooper was requested information regarding, what exactly is the position regarding the gold, because Venezuela is requesting it. And Yvette Cooper said it had nothing to do with the government, it's not a political decision, it's got everything to do with the Bank of England, which I think opens up good possibilities, because it's not being a politics. Before, the court, the high court, the commercial court, the appeals court, all threw the hot potato to each other for a while. And they came to the conclusion they could not challenge the decision of the government because it would challenge foreign policy of the government, and their role, constitution, was not that one. So they said, we're going to leave the issue in abeyance. Now the issue is clear. So let's hope that, this happens. The Venezuelans are asking for $5 billion, which were denied by the IMF at the time of COVID, which Venezuela is entitled to. So they're demanding that. They're coughing up some of it, and so on. So we are massively concentrating on this here, and we have already 14,000 signatures. So the more signatures we get, the better it is. And we have an EDM of 30 MPs led by Richard Berger and Jeremy Corbyn saying, return the gold to Venezuela because it's desperate for this particular point in time. So that's what we are, and we need to intensify our solidarity to make sure that things end up well. My sense, in terms of the playing for time by the Venezuelan government, is this: the Trump project, domestic and international, is collapsing. It's not collapsing, but it's collapsing. It's clearly going down the pan. So the more you wait and sustain your situation without confronting anything, even by making concessions which are very unpalatable, some of them, then you have a chance to actually recover everything. At the same time, the government is encouraging the masses to actually mobilize, to do everything and so on. So this is where we come in to insist and put pressure by influencing our political system, our political establishment, to do something about it. If we were to actually get the gold back, that will create a floodgate for others, in the rest of Europe have to do it. So that's where we're at. So that's as far as Venezuela is concerned.
I just want to quickly.
Are you getting? Sorry,
George. I just want to quickly, while Francisco's mentioned there, flash up. So if you want to sign that petition to get involved in trying to force the gold back to Venezuela, where it should be, venezuelasolidarity.co.uk. Visit there. And I believe that there can be donations through to Venezuela for the earthquake relief campaign, Francisco, as well.
Not the campaign. Not the campaign. There is a website which is called Venezuela No Está Sola. Venezuela is not alone, which is official from a Venezuelan bank. We are not.
So is that venezuelaisnotalone.com, I'm assuming?
I will send it to you when I have it. Let me see if I can find it right away.
And I was just going to ask Francisco if are you getting the full support of the union movement as well? Are the unions folding in behind, giving full support or not?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we have the picket, for example, that we organized immediately after the attack. We had, the NEU, we had Unite, we had, Unison, we had the TUC. We had a substantial support. I think that have been maintained. They've been extremely good, particularly the Education Union, but not exclusively, to continue their support. And as issues come up, then every time we ask them, they support it. I cannot find it, but it's, let me see. Give me a second.
If you send it through afterwards, Francisco, we can add it to the description when the podcast goes up. That's fine. Mate.
Yeah, I'll write here the title. Yeah, that's the title. So you are supposed to put HTTPS and then .com.
I'll just flash it up onto the screen in a moment.
Yeah.
So that should be up on the screen now. So yeah, Venezuela, NOESTASOLA.com. So that's where to go for donations to the earthquake relief fund.
Yeah, so we're in an interesting situation in Venezuela, but Venezuela is organized, and want to move to Cuba now first, okay. Venezuela cannot send oil to Cuba. And the reason, if it does, the United States will take over the tanker. So therefore, it stopped doing it. Because the United States had imposed a military naval blockade against Cuba. For about nearly 5 months, not a drop of oil has come into the island. The intention is to ensure it collapses and so on. But Venezuela sets up a national campaign of support, solidarity with Cuba, to actually get, whatever it is, resources, money, food, and so on to Cuba. And that can be sent, and they've been sending, I think they've done 6 to 8 shipments to Cuba already, tons of it, obviously, because it's a national campaign. And it's called Love is Paid with Love, which is a famous book by Jose Marti, Amor con Amor se paga. And it's got huge resonance in Venezuela. And this is sponsored by the government, of course, which initiated. And so, there is an unbreakable solidarity of Venezuela with Cuba that is not gone away, although it unfortunately cannot send oil.
And
so
the Cubans have consistently helped with health programs in Venezuela. I presume that's what they're repaying the love with.
Well, that was the agreement. 89,000 barrels of oil a day for 20,000 doctors. That was cheap if you think about it. How much does it cost to produce a doctor? Several years of state expenditure and so on. Those 20,000 doctors actually provided free health care like that, to about 23, 24 million Venezuelans. We've never seen a doctor in their life before. So it's just extraordinary transformation that showed the strengths of integration, economic and regional integration, because you can share and whatever your strength with everybody else, and their strength can be beneficial to you. Imagine Brazil, Mexico, and so on. So anyway, the situation with Cuba is really bad. The last week, the electric system collapsed 4 times in a week, and because there is no oil. And the reason is there is a program of times when the grid is going to be active. People know when they are, and the moment they know they are, they all go for it, and the consequence, they break it. So it's extremely problematical, but the resilience of the Cubans is extraordinary. There is no, which is the intention, there is no riots, there is no massive demonstration, there is obviously discontent, people are not happy. Nevertheless, there is no political manifestation against government. The intention was to actually put so much pressure on the population, even the food. According to some reports, between 7 to 90% of the population actually are food deficient in different degrees in Cuba. That's incredible. That's so horrible. When it comes to medicine, the United States is trying to stop medicine from coming into Cuba. Everything is designed, particularly by Marco Rubio, to ensure that Cuba is destroyed. At some point, when and if they weaken it enough, they might go for some military strike, which I think, I'm not sure, but my sense is that Trump might not be too persuaded on this because he's got too many fronts open everywhere, and one more might cause trouble, especially if the Cubans are good fighters, as everybody knows they are, and might cause them a significant trouble. Because in order to take Cuba, you have to really send, troops on the ground, and it will take more than 50,000, which would be a very small figure. So Cuba actually is resisting very well, but the main country which is supporting, is not the only one, is China. China is already set up 55 solar parks in Cuba to replace the electricity because, the energy comes from the sun. The intention is to actually build 92 between now and 27 and continue building as much as possible all the way through. One of the donations that the Chinese gave to Cuba was 60,000 tons of rice, which is 10% of their annual consumption. That's serious donation, and everybody else in the world. The Mexicans are sending, the Brazilians are sending, the Colombians were sending until the right-wing coming came in. Many other countries are sending support to Cuba from the European Union, from everywhere. So this is sort of, our sense in the Cuban companies, for as long as the Cubans are able to maintain things without collapsing, which they are, then they will survive because things will build up, especially in the question of energy. There is a significant amount of traffic in Cuba, not because of fuel, but because they have electric vehicles, mainly from China. Little vehicles. Everybody's mobilizing in these vehicles. So they're getting there, and they still produce vaccines, they still produce whatever they need. The complication is, in a country which is so hot, you need a refrigerator. If there is no electricity, your food goes off. So that's a serious part of the problem. And then when it comes to operations and so on, the solar panels are being allocated in such a way that hospitals, particularly hospitals, clinics and so on, actually are given total priority. Doctors actually sometimes, are carried out operations, as told by the Cubans themselves to us, with their phones, with the lights of their mobile phones. It's sort of terrible, and people are dying. We do not know how many, but people are dying. So it's extremely important that we really emphasize and concentrate and focus. Venezuela, I wouldn't say it's okay, but Venezuela is sort of holding on reasonably well, and it's growing economically, it's selling oil, it's getting there, and it's being recognized and so on. But Cuba is really, really in a difficult situation. And what is interesting, the number of countries, particularly Mexico, which has a huge border with the monster, is challenging the United States, keeps saying not only oil, but also food and so on. So for as long as this is maintained, Russia is also helping out. And for as long as this is maintained, for as long as the United States doesn't go for a strike, for a military strike, Cuba is going to be strengthened slowly but steadily as time goes by. And I think they calculate, they already have introduced economic reforms which will be presented as capitalism and God knows what, which is, when Venezuela has done the same, they pass laws, both of the countries, which is when you have an economy which is under siege because it's totally blockaded, you cannot generate income sufficiently domestically to engage in any investment. So the only way around is to actually get from international companies, multinational investment. China did it. Russia did, the Bolshevik Revolution did it with a new economic policy under Lenin because of the same thing. The war has created enormous difficulty. Venezuela had a law which allows multinational companies to come in, provided the state has sufficient control over the operation. That's not a problem because sovereignty is maintained, and Cubans are doing the same. If they're introducing a significant amount of economic reforms, we'll see how they work. And Diaz-Canel gave a report recently which publicly said a significant proportion of the problems that they're having come from outside because of aggression, but they have a significant amount of problems generated domestically because of bad habits. And he wants to ensure that these are, addressed. Bad habits is people do not work hard because they take it easy. People are not very efficient. Perhaps systems they have are not very efficient, have too much paperwork and so on. Maybe all of this is going to be addressed. And the Chinese have sent teams of experts on food, on agricultural production, and they know a great deal about this. They've sent experts on fighting poverty. China eliminated extreme poverty in 2021, completely to zero. There's no extreme poverty in China. So they send experts to how to deal with it, because there is a point when the very extreme poor disappear from sight. So unless you actually go there where they are and take them out and then, sort of put them back on whatever it is, some circuit, then they remain extreme poor. And that's what Xi Jinping did with extreme poverty in China. And that's what is being done in Cuba. So the key from our point of view is solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. We got 30 MPs to support us. The Cubans have got 118. The Cubans already campaign 118 MPs, and this is growing. To ensure that what we want is the UK government to give donations, to give a state donation, not a small thing, a real serious one, investment and so on. We want the UK government it has no relations with Cuba. It has not applied sanctions to Cuba. It hasn't. But it refuses to have a normal constructive engagement with Cuba. It stopped the flights from the UK to Cuba, which, from the point of view of tourism is important. And I want to finish with this, one of the key problems that Cuba confronts is being in the list of states sponsoring terrorism, which were put there by Biden and then Trump. And what that means is this: no company in the world, no matter who they are, unless they come from China or Russia, but no other company in the world will actually touch Cuba with any investment of any kind for as long as they are in the state of, in that list of states sponsoring terrorism, because that company is liable to be punished by the United States. And they have laws for that. So that is part of the problem. We're demanding that they are taken off that list because it's crucial.
I was going to just jump in there, Francisco. The irony of a country where if they rock up, it's usually in a tank or in an F-35 jet or with a rifle, certainly. Yeah. Calling a country where if their people are rocking up, it's usually doctors responding to an emergency. Calling them the terrorist is absolutely ludicrous. Yeah. Because we all know, we've all seen every time anything. I mean, in COVID in Italy, Cuba sent doctors over there to help out. In every earthquake around the world or every major natural disaster, the first people on the ground are Cuban doctors going to help people. Where the same cannot be said for America. And I think that's what's so dangerous for the American people is they look south of the border, and like you said in Venezuela, suddenly people have got access to free healthcare, where no one in America has that access. Like we spoke earlier, there's you get a serious illness, you're looking at absolutely devastating debt unless you're from extreme wealth. Yeah. And it's a dangerous idea, isn't it, that we should all, no matter where we were born or who we were born to, have access to health. Yeah, it's...
No, absolutely. But because it hasn't collapsed and because it's beginning to hold up reasonably well, although in precarious conditions, then Marco Rubio has gone for a Markazite solution. I'm sure you've heard of it. He made a speech on the 16th of July, which is based on a document, issued by the White House of 100 pages, where the intention is to actually witch hunt all the organizations that actually are helping Cuba. And it says Cuba is the country where is the communism, is the center of communism in the 21st century. I mean, on the one hand, they're saying Cuba is collapsed, it's terrible, nothing works, everything is horrible because they're communist. And at the same time, it's an incredible threat at the same time. How can they do this? And they're saying, Ruby is saying, that it's influencing significant currents within the United States, intends to persecute those currents. They're being subpoenaed, many of them, 3 of them at least anyway. One is the Tricontinental Institute of Social Research, which is led by, Vijay Prashad. That's one of them. And then there is another one, which is Breakthrough News, which used to be called People's Meeting, no, what's it called? People's Dispatch. That was the name. And I know because I wrote articles for People's Dispatch, many. So, and the intention, it even includes all the Social Democrats, all of them. All the Democrat Socialists are included there. Their names, Ocasio-Cortez, Soran Mandani, and so on, they are mentioned. And in that list, there is mentioned the British Cuba Solidarity Campaign. And then there is mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. So the intention is to organize a witch hunt within the United States in order to stop the support that Cuba is beginning to get, because Democrats are saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing? You're just punishing the people. This is not right," and it's beginning to grow, and that's why it's going for this. It's not going to be able to actually get too far. Nevertheless, it is dangerous to go that way because it will create another substantial confrontation with possibly people being arrested and God knows what else. So, and at the meeting where Rubio spoke, there was Stephen Miller, the fascist intellectual of the Trump administration, and then there was Scott Bessent, who is the Treasury, Secretary. And the reason why this is important, because the Treasury is going to check into the finances of this organization, where this money is coming from. There's going to be all this and God knows what else. And they interviewed Manolo de los Santos, who is one of the leaders of one of these organizations. And in an interview, he said, our lawyers are responding to this. And it's completely crazy. I think they're desperate. And so it is important to actually create the biggest, the broadest front internationally as possible, denouncing these. And, hopefully the government here will say this is not acceptable. We want to persuade the government, not just have an idea. So, viva Cuba, viva Venezuela, viva Latin America.
So to be able to finish on a positive point, what is it that can be done around the world to anybody who may be watching this? What can be done to support Cuba, to support Venezuela, as we've already talked about some of the campaigns, but briefly, what can be done for us to keep the hope alive?
On Venezuela is political support and demand the call is returned, and also there is a petition that no show trial against President Maduro. We want their safe return to Venezuela. That's, we have 2 petitions there. And then politically to mobilize as much as possible. I want to have it broad as possible because it's the defense of national sovereignty and the right to self-determination. That's it. So we had members of Liberal Democrats, we have Greens and so on, who have been quite nice, nationalists of course, and so on. And Cuba is even broader, and etc. When it comes to Cuba, actually money is no good because Cuba is difficult to actually send money there. But they're asking for food, which is not perishable, such as rice and beans. If you contact the campaign, well, signed all the statements that they have, which is Cuba Vive to support the medical system there and so on, and then contact the Cuba campaign, get into the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website, and then see their initiative. One of them is to food. The Cuba Solidarity Campaign has sent already about 8 containers with all sorts of stuff, medical equipment, medicines, and then food. If you send cans of food as well as rice, beans, this sort of thing, we will take them and then we'll organize the sending. So that would be very helpful. And of course, solidarity denouncing and getting the government here to actually change its mind and do something about it, which will really help. If one of the accomplices countries actually were to break ranks, that would be fantastic. We already have significant interesting developments in Spain with Pedro Sanchez, who is already breaking ranks. So it is possible, it can be done. That would be very good indeed.
Excellent. Another world is possible.
No, but it's better than that. Rodrigo Paz, a right-wing president, was elected in Bolivia because there was a mess in the left there, just to be blunt. And then, less than a month after he came to office, there was a massive 53 days national mobilization with blockading of, motorways and roads and so on, by all the masses against his decisions, which are neoliberal privatization of 53 days, which was very serious conflict, total crisis. The Peruvians already got a right-wing government. It's going to be Kiko Fujimori. Is already beginning to have troubles already. The Cast administration in Chile, which is an extreme right-wing government, is in a complete mess after 1 month or 2 months in office. The Ecuadorian government is a rogue state, it's a failed state, absolutely clearly. And then the already massive opposition beginning to emerge in Colombia with the right-wing administration that just through fraud managed to win the elections. And then Lula is scoring something like 63% compared to Flavio Bolsonaro, the son of Jair Bolsonaro, who scored only 25%. And the reason why that is the case is because Trump applied sanctions, tariffs against Brazil. And of course, he had to support him and he went down the pan right away. So the level of resistance and capacity that we have for resistance in Latin America is very big indeed. So we can alert people to where the struggles are taking place. And, when we get support and solidarity support for those struggles, that makes a difference. So that's what we're fighting back and we're beginning to win. And the reason is the right wing doesn't have anything to offer, and therefore it cannot consolidate their gains. Where we have something more serious to offer and we'll fight for it and we'll win. Definitely.
Thank you as always, Francisco. Absolutely incredible to see you again, comrade. And yeah, I think we can all take hope from that because it's the right can't offer anything, whether that's in Europe here or Latin America or the United States. It's a dying ideology which offers nothing but hate. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Wonderful. And, my gratitude to the audience when they see.
Thank you, comrades.
Okay.